My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, and 1 week before my brother's engagement party, I was standing in my office wrapping a silver picture frame I had bought for him when my father called and said, "You're not coming. We won't embarrass ourselves with you." For several seconds, I honestly thought I had misheard him. Then he repeated it, slower this time, as though speaking to a child who couldn't understand simple instructions. According to him, important clients, wealthy relatives, and respected people from my brother's industry would be attending. He said my uncertain career and my history of failure would invite uncomfortable questions. I looked down at the gift in my hands while he explained that my absence would be easier for everyone. Have you ever realized that your family wasn't ashamed of something you had done, but of the person they had decided you were? I didn't argue. I didn't tell him what I had been building for the past 4 years, or whose signatures were waiting on my desk, or why 3 regional news stations had requested interviews with me that morning. I simply said, "Understood," and ended the call. 2 days later, my brother walked into a company headquarters, saw me near the executive conference room, and laughed. "What are you doing here, applying for a job?" The woman beside him stopped so suddenly that the folder in her hand slipped open. She stared at him, then at me. "No, honey," she whispered. "She's my boss." That was the moment my brother's smile disappeared. But it wasn't the moment he lost everything. That came later, after I discovered what he had done behind my back. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what the weather is like there. I want to know just how far this story has traveled. For most of my life, my family treated success as something that had to look impressive from across a dinner table. My brother, Michael Whitmore, understood that rule perfectly. He wore tailored suits, drove cars he couldn't quite afford, and introduced himself as a senior commercial insurance advisor even before he had earned the promotion. Our father, Richard, repeated Michael's job title at every holiday gathering as though he had personally engraved it on a trophy. Our mother, Diane, kept his magazine interviews on the refrigerator. They never asked how much of Michael's polished image was built on borrowed money, favors from our father's golf partners, and the unpaid work of people he considered beneath him. I knew because I had once been one of those people. 6 years earlier, when Michael was preparing for his licensing examination, I had spent 3 months organizing his notes, building practice files, and checking the financial models he presented to his firm. The night before his interview, he panicked and asked me to rewrite his risk analysis presentation. I stayed awake until 4 in the morning fixing it. He got the promotion. At the celebration dinner, our father raised a glass and praised Michael for accomplishing everything without help. Michael looked directly at me and said nothing. I learned something that night. Some people do not forget who helped them. They simply count on that person remaining silent. At the time, I worked as an emergency operations coordinator for a hospital network in Colorado. It was unglamorous work involving evacuation routes, backup power failures, supply chain disruptions, and contingency planning for disasters nobody wanted to imagine. My parents called it administrative support. Michael called me the woman with the clipboard. Then a wind-driven wildfire forced 2 medical facilities to evacuate within hours. One hospital had no reliable transportation plan for patients who required oxygen, dialysis, or temperature-controlled medication. I helped coordinate buses, mobile generators, emergency storage, and temporary treatment sites. We moved every patient safely. The experience changed me. I realized that thousands of clinics, nursing homes, warehouses, and small manufacturers had emergency plans that existed only on paper. When disaster arrived, they discovered too late that nobody knew what to do. That was how Emberline Recovery Group began. I left my stable job, used nearly all my savings, and partnered with Lena Brooks, a former structural engineer who had spent years evaluating buildings after floods and fires. We did not create an app or sell a fashionable product. We helped organizations survive their worst day. Our teams designed evacuation systems, trained employees, audited backup infrastructure, coordinated emergency vendors, and restored operations after fires, storms, cyber attacks, and utility failures. During our first year, I worked from a rented room above a closed printing shop. My family saw the temporary address on an envelope and concluded that I had thrown away a respectable career to become a struggling consultant. I let them believe it. I had spent too many years explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. 4 years later, Emberline employed 86 people across 3 states. We had helped a food processing company reopen 9 days after a major electrical fire, relocated 200 nursing home residents during a flash flood, and prevented a regional pharmacy chain from losing millions of dollars in temperature-sensitive medication. The week my father banned me from the engagement party, we were finalizing the acquisition of a smaller risk intelligence company. The deal would double our corporate client base and make Emberline one of the fastest-growing privately held recovery firms in the region. Only a few executives knew the details, including our newly hired Director of Client Strategy, Jessica Bennett. I had met Jessica 3 months earlier during a contract negotiation. She was sharp, calm under pressure, and unwilling to promise clients anything we couldn't deliver. I hired her after watching her challenge a room full of senior executives who wanted to hide a warehouse safety failure instead of fixing it. What I did not know during our first 2 interviews was that she was dating my brother. She used her professional name, Jessica Bennett, and Michael had never shown enough interest in my work to learn who served on my leadership team. By the time Jessica and I discovered the connection, she had already accepted the position. We agreed to keep our family relationship separate from work. She seemed embarrassed that Michael had never mentioned what I did. I told her I wasn't surprised. 2 days after my father's call, Jessica brought Michael to our headquarters because they were meeting a venue coordinator nearby. He entered the lobby while I was reviewing renovation plans with our operations director. Michael looked at the Emberline logo behind the reception desk, then at my plain navy suit, and laughed. "What are you doing here? Applying for a job?" Several employees turned toward us. Jessica froze. "No, honey," she said quietly. "She's my boss." Michael's face changed, but only for a second. Then he smiled again and pretended the entire exchange was a joke. What he did next revealed something far worse than embarrassment. His eyes moved from Jessica's executive badge to the confidential acquisition folder in her hands. He recognized the name of the company printed across the top. And I saw calculation replace surprise. Michael recovered quickly because charm had always been his preferred form of damage control. He laughed, put one hand against his chest, and said, "Okay, you got me. Sarah never tells us anything." The implication was clear. I had hidden my success, so his ignorance was somehow my fault. Jessica did not laugh. Neither did the employees standing near reception. I stepped forward and held out my hand as though Michael were any other visitor. "Welcome to Emberline. All guests need to sign in." His jaw tightened. He filled out the visitor form while asking questions that sounded casual, but were not. How long had we occupied the building? Did we own the property? How many clients did we have? Was Jessica responsible for major accounts? He even glanced at the folder again and asked whether the acquisition target was a new customer. Jessica closed the folder and told him the contents were confidential. Michael's pride could tolerate my survival, but not my authority. It was one thing for the family failure to quietly earn a living. It was another for me to employ the woman he planned to marry. He asked for a tour, and I refused, because he had no business reason to enter secured work areas. His smile became thinner. "Still taking yourself very seriously, I see." I replied, "I take client confidentiality seriously. You should understand that in insurance." The comment landed harder than I intended. His firm sold commercial coverage to several industries we served, and professional discretion was supposed to be the foundation of his work. After Michael left, Jessica remained in my office. She apologized for his behavior, though none of it was her responsibility. Then she asked why my family believed I was unemployed. I explained that they knew I had started a consulting business but had never bothered to learn its name. Whenever I mentioned contracts or expansion, my father changed the subject to Michael's commissions. My mother once asked whether I had considered returning to real employment. At family dinners, Michael described me as someone still experimenting with a business idea. Correcting them had begun to feel like applying for permission to exist. Jessica looked disturbed. He told me you kept changing careers and refused help from everyone. That sentence stayed with me. I asked what else he had told her. According to Michael, I was impulsive, jealous of his success, and financially unstable. He claimed our parents had repeatedly offered to help me, but I rejected them because I resented the family. None of that was true. My parents had never invested $1 in Emberline. The only money I had ever received from them was a $2,000 loan for community college when I was 19, which I repaid within a year. Meanwhile, our father had introduced Michael to his first clients, paid the down payment on his condo, and quietly covered 2 failed investments. I told Jessica she should judge me by what she saw, not what Michael or I said. She nodded, but the doubt in her expression had shifted direction. 3 days later, Emberline was scheduled to present at the Rocky Mountain Resilience Forum, where municipal leaders, insurers, hospital administrators, manufacturers, and emergency management professionals gathered to evaluate new risk response partnerships. The conference mattered because our acquisition depended on securing a multi-year agreement with a coalition of regional health systems. Losing that contract would not destroy Emberline, but it could delay expansion by a year. Jessica was leading the client strategy portion of the presentation. Lena would explain our engineering response model. I would deliver the closing proposal. The night before the forum, an anonymous email reached 3 coalition executives. It accused Emberline of falsifying response times, using unlicensed contractors, and concealing a workplace injury during a warehouse recovery project. Attached were screenshots, internal-looking documents, and a statement supposedly written by a former employee. The allegations were detailed enough to appear credible and timed perfectly to create panic before our presentation. One coalition representative canceled a private meeting. Another demanded an independent review. Within an hour, whispers were moving through the conference hotel. Lena wanted to issue an immediate public denial. Our attorney advised us to wait until we could identify the source. I studied the attached documents instead. At first, they looked convincing. Then I noticed that one claim referred to an emergency vendor we had stopped using 18 months earlier. Another included terminology copied from an insurance risk report, not an operational recovery file. Whoever created the package understood commercial coverage, but did not understand how Emberline documented field incidents. Jessica stood beside me as I compared timestamps. Her face slowly lost its color. One attachment showed the name of a confidential acquisition target. That information had appeared only in the folder Michael saw in our lobby. "Sarah," she said, barely above a whisper. "Michael asked me about that company last night." She explained that he had pretended to be curious about her new job. He asked whether Emberline was financially strong enough to acquire another business, whether the conference contract was essential, and which insurers covered our operations. She had refused to answer, but he already knew enough to investigate. At the forum the following morning, Michael appeared in the VIP section representing his insurance brokerage. His firm was advising a competing recovery company that wanted the same health system contract. He sat in the front row beside 2 senior partners, wearing the expression of someone waiting for a building to collapse. When I stepped onto the stage, a moderator interrupted before I could begin. He announced that serious allegations had been raised about Emberline's safety record and asked whether I wished to postpone the presentation. Every face turned toward me. Michael leaned back and folded his arms. He expected me to retreat. Instead, I placed the anonymous documents on the podium and said, "No, I'd like to address them now." I told the audience that crisis management required more than polished plans. It required clarity when fear made silence convenient. Then I displayed the accusations on the screen behind me, one by one. I did not deny them emotionally or complain about being targeted. I showed evidence. The supposedly unreported warehouse injury had been documented with the state, the client, and the insurer within 43 minutes. The worker received treatment for a minor wrist sprain and returned to duty after medical clearance. The allegedly unlicensed contractors were certified specialists operating under permits visible in public municipal records. The response times had not been altered. The anonymous sender had compared dispatch times with arrival times, while omitting the client's mandatory safety clearance. Then Lena demonstrated that 2 of the attached internal reports used formatting Emberline had never used. Our attorney had obtained metadata showing that the files were created the previous evening on software licensed to a commercial insurance brokerage. We did not name the brokerage yet, but several people in the audience immediately looked toward Michael's table. One of his senior partners stopped taking notes and turned to him. The room had become so quiet that I could hear the click of the presentation remote in my hand. "Someone expected these allegations to frighten us into withdrawing," I said. "But a company responsible for guiding others through disasters cannot run from its own." I announced that Emberline had already requested a forensic review and would provide the results to every conference participant. Until that review was complete, we would disclose all relevant safety records voluntarily. The coalition chair thanked me and allowed the presentation to continue. For the next 40 minutes, our team explained how Emberline could keep hospitals operating during wildfires, cyber attacks, fuel shortages, and regional power failures. Jessica presented a strategy for protecting vulnerable patients during evacuations. Lena showed real recovery timelines. I closed with a proposal that linked our fees to measurable preparedness benchmarks. We did not ask the coalition to trust our promises. We invited them to test our systems. When the session ended, the applause began cautiously, then grew. Coalition representatives surrounded our table with questions. 2 hospital executives who had planned to withdraw requested private meetings. Michael remained seated until one of his partners ordered him into the hallway. I found him near a service corridor 20 minutes later. Jessica was already there. She asked him directly whether he had sent the documents. Michael laughed and called the accusation ridiculous. He said competitors attacked one another all the time and accused us of being dramatic. Then he looked at me and made his mistake. "Maybe you should be grateful," he said. "That little stunt gave you a heroic moment on stage." Jessica stared at him. "You called it a stunt?" Michael's eyes shifted. "I meant whoever did it. I asked how he knew the sender expected us to withdraw. That detail had not been made public." Michael told me I was twisting his words. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You think one good presentation makes you important? You run a cleanup company. People like me decide whether companies like yours get insured." There it was. The belief beneath everything. Michael did not think my work had value unless someone from his world approved it. He had seen my success and interpreted it as theft from the family hierarchy. Jessica removed her engagement ring and held it in her palm. She did not hand it back yet, but Michael saw the gesture. His confidence cracked. He told her not to let my jealousy poison their relationship. Jessica asked why he had lied about my career, why he had described me as unstable, and why he had questioned her about confidential business files. Michael said he had been protecting her. From what? Working for a woman he had spent years calling a failure? He turned toward me. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? You couldn't stand that the family was celebrating me for once." For once. I almost laughed. My childhood birthday dinners had been rescheduled around his soccer matches. My college graduation had ended early because he had a client event. I had completed his licensing presentation, covered his debts twice, and remained silent while he accepted praise for work I had done. Yet in Michael's mind, every room belonged to him before he entered it. I told him I had not sent the anonymous files, lied to Jessica, or banned myself from his engagement party. He had created every problem standing in front of him. Then I said something he clearly had never expected to hear from me. "I'm not competing with you, Michael. You're collapsing under the weight of an image I stopped admiring years ago." His senior partner approached before he could answer and requested his phone and company laptop. The brokerage had opened an internal investigation. Michael refused at first, claiming his personal devices were private. That refusal only increased suspicion. Security escorted him from the conference floor, while people who once greeted him as a rising star avoided eye contact. That afternoon, the Health Coalition selected Emberline as its preferred recovery partner, subject to final review. It should have felt like victory. Instead, I felt the old ache of knowing my own brother had tried to destroy the livelihoods of 86 employees because he could not bear to see me succeed. Revenge sounds satisfying when imagined from a distance. In reality, discovering that someone you loved chose to harm you leaves no clean emotion behind. That evening, my mother called. She did not ask whether the allegations were true. She asked why I had humiliated Michael in public. My mother's first words were, "Whatever happened between you two should have stayed private." I asked whether submitting fabricated safety documents to a business conference counted as a private disagreement. She said Michael had denied sending anything and warned me not to ruin his career over sibling resentment. Then my father joined the call. Richard's voice carried the same cold authority he had used when banning me from the engagement party. He told me to withdraw my complaint, stop speaking to Michael's employer, and attend the celebration so the family could present a united image. I reminded him that I had not been invited. There was a pause. Then he said, "You know what I mean." Yes, I knew exactly what he meant. When they thought I was insignificant, excluding me protected their image. Now that Michael was under investigation, including me might protect it. They did not want reconciliation. They wanted access to my credibility. I refused to interfere with the investigation. My father's tone hardened. He accused me of enjoying Michael's trouble and said my success had made me arrogant. I asked him a question I had avoided for years. When did you last ask what my company actually does? He changed the subject. I asked how many people I employed. He did not know. I asked whether he knew I had coordinated hospital evacuations during a wildfire. Silence. I asked whether he knew Michael had used my work to earn his first promotion. My mother said the past was irrelevant. The past becomes irrelevant very quickly when it exposes the person a family has chosen to worship. That night, my parents posted a long message on social media about loyalty, forgiveness, and the pain of watching ambition divide siblings. They did not name me, but relatives understood. Several called to tell me I should be the bigger person. One aunt said Michael had always been sensitive about my intelligence, and that I should have handled him gently. Apparently, his insecurity was my responsibility, while my humiliation was simply character building. Michael called 13 times. I did not answer. His messages moved through predictable stages: mockery, denial, anger, bargaining, then threats. He claimed he had contacts who could make Emberline uninsurable. He warned that the anonymous complaint would look worse once reporters started asking questions. Finally, he said Jessica would never remain at a company that destroyed her future husband. Jessica was sitting across from me when that message arrived. She had left the conference and gone directly to her sister's apartment instead of returning home with Michael. The engagement party was still scheduled for Saturday, but she no longer knew whether it would happen. She showed me emails Michael had sent from a personal account to one of Emberline's former subcontractors. He offered money for negative information about our projects. The subcontractor had refused and forwarded the messages to Jessica after recognizing her name from our company website. That evidence changed the situation. This was no longer a suspicion based on metadata. Michael had actively solicited damaging claims. Jessica gave the emails to our attorney and the brokerage's investigator. She also disclosed that Michael had borrowed money from her to support what he described as a private investment fund. In reality, he had placed much of it into the competing recovery company represented at the forum. If Emberline lost the health system contract, the competitor's value would rise, and Michael stood to profit personally. His motive was not merely jealousy, it was financial. The engagement party went ahead because my parents had already paid for the venue and refused to cancel. Jessica attended for less than 20 minutes. She arrived without her ring, asked to speak privately with Michael, and formally ended the engagement. Michael shouted loudly enough for guests to hear. He accused her of choosing me over him and claimed I had manipulated her with money and a prestigious title. Jessica replied that she was not leaving because of me. She was leaving because he had lied, stolen confidential information, risked her career, and attempted to destroy a company employing dozens of innocent people. Several guests recorded the confrontation. By midnight, fragments appeared online. My parents' carefully planned celebration became a public spectacle anyway, not because I attended, but because the son they protected could no longer control his behavior. While the party unraveled, I was at Emberline headquarters with our legal and security teams. We traced the anonymous email to a temporary account accessed through the Wi-Fi network of Michael's brokerage. Security footage showed him entering an empty meeting room during the relevant time. The forensic investigator also recovered drafts from his company laptop after the brokerage obtained legal authorization to examine it. At 1:17 in the morning, Michael sent me one final message. "Fix this, or I'll make sure the whole family knows what kind of person you really are." I read it twice, then saved it for the investigators. For the first time, his threats did not frighten me. They documented him. By Monday morning, Michael had been suspended from his brokerage. 2 days later, the firm terminated him for misuse of company systems, undisclosed financial conflicts, attempted commercial interference, and failure to cooperate with the investigation. The state licensing board opened a separate inquiry into whether he had violated professional conduct requirements. His largest clients were reassigned before lunch. The competing recovery company denied authorizing his actions and returned his investment while its own attorneys prepared to distance themselves from him. Michael's downfall was not caused by one insult, one confrontation, or one dramatic speech. It came from documentation. Every lie had created a record. Every threat had produced a timestamp. Every attempt to control the story had given investigators another reason not to trust him. Emberline released a factual statement confirming that the allegations against us were fabricated and that we were cooperating with authorities. We did not identify Michael publicly. We did not need to. His former employer issued its own disclosure, and industry publications connected the details within hours. The Health Coalition completed its review and awarded us a 5-year regional preparedness contract worth more than any agreement we had previously signed. The contract was satisfying, but the most meaningful moment came during a company meeting. I stood in front of 86 employees and told them the investigation had cleared our work. Several field coordinators applauded. One technician who had recently bought his first home hugged Lena. Their relief reminded me why Michael's attack had been unforgivable. He had not merely tried to embarrass his sister. He had gambled with the incomes, health insurance, and futures of people whose names he did not know. My parents arrived at my office that afternoon without an appointment. Reception called to ask whether I wanted security to turn them away. I almost said yes. Instead, I allowed them into a small ground-floor meeting room, not my executive office, and not the private areas they had never cared to see. My mother looked exhausted. My father looked angry that exhaustion had failed to produce sympathy. Richard said Michael was facing financial ruin and possibly losing his professional license. He wanted me to send a letter stating that I believed Michael had acted emotionally rather than maliciously. Our attorney had told him such a letter might reduce disciplinary consequences. I asked whether Michael had admitted what he did. My mother said he was not ready because he felt betrayed. I asked whether he had apologized to Jessica, Emberline's employees, the subcontractor he tried to bribe, or the clients he deceived. No. Then my father said, "He's your brother. How much punishment is enough?" I looked at the man who had banned me from a family celebration because my presence supposedly caused embarrassment. Now he wanted me to risk my reputation to rescue the person who had attempted to destroy it. Consequences are not punishment just because they happen to someone you love, I said. My mother began to cry. She said they had made mistakes and admitted they should have learned more about my company. But even her apology centered on what they had failed to know, not what they had chosen to believe. They had accepted every flattering story Michael told, and every cruel story he told about me, because those stories preserved the family structure they preferred. I gave them 3 conditions before I would consider any future relationship. First, they had to remove their social media post implying that ambition had divided the family and replace it with a truthful statement acknowledging that they had publicly blamed me without knowing the facts. Second, they had to tell our extended family that I had not caused Michael's investigation or Jessica's decision. Third, they had to stop asking me to intervene in legal, licensing, or employment consequences. My father called the conditions humiliating. I replied, "You were comfortable humiliating me when you believed I had no power. Why does truth become cruelty when it applies to Michael?" He stood so quickly that his chair scraped the floor. He said I had changed. That part was true. The old Sarah would have softened her words to preserve peace. She would have accepted a partial apology, written the letter, and spent years resenting herself for it. The woman sitting across from him no longer considered silence a form of love. My parents left without agreeing. That evening, Michael appeared in the employee parking garage. He had followed Jessica's car, assuming she would still be working late. Security stopped him before he entered the building, but he shouted my name until I came downstairs with 2 guards and our attorney on speakerphone. Michael looked nothing like the polished man from the conference. His tie was crooked, his eyes were bloodshot, and his confidence had curdled into desperation. He accused me of stealing his career, his fiancée, and his parents' respect. I told him Jessica was not property, his career had ended because of his decisions, and our parents' respect had never belonged to me. Then he said something that finally explained years of hostility. "You were supposed to need us. You were supposed to come back after that business failed." My failure had been part of their plan. As long as I struggled, Michael remained the successful child, my parents remained the judges, and I remained grateful for scraps of approval. Emberline had not merely changed my income, it had destroyed the role they assigned me. Michael demanded that I say the evidence had been misunderstood. I refused. He stepped toward me, and security blocked him. Before leaving, he said I would regret choosing strangers over blood. I answered, "My employees didn't try to ruin me. You did." The following week, the licensing board suspended Michael's authorization to sell commercial insurance pending a full hearing. His condo was listed for sale soon afterward because he could no longer afford the payments. Several relatives who had pressured me to forgive him stopped calling once they learned he had asked them for money. My parents eventually published the correction I requested. It was stiff, brief, and clearly painful for them. But for the first time, they stated publicly that I had built a legitimate company, that Michael had acted without my involvement, and that blaming me had been wrong. I did not celebrate. Accountability is necessary, but it cannot return the years spent believing you had to earn the right to be respected. 6 months later, Emberline opened a new regional training center outside Denver. We converted an abandoned distribution building into a simulated emergency environment where hospital teams, factory managers, school administrators, and local responders could practice evacuations, communication failures, and disaster recovery. On opening day, I stood beside Lena and watched the first group move through a power loss exercise. Nobody in that building cared whether my father once considered me an embarrassment. They cared whether the systems we built would keep people alive. Jessica remained our director of client strategy. She earned a promotion after leading the health system partnership, not because of our family connection, but because her work deserved it. We established stricter conflict of interest rules, stronger document controls, and additional safeguards for employees facing pressure from partners or relatives. Jessica never reconciled with Michael. She later told me that the most painful part was not discovering his dishonesty. It was realizing how many warning signs she had explained away because he was charming when challenged. Michael's license was eventually revoked for 3 years. He avoided criminal charges after reaching a civil settlement, surrendering his investment records, and agreeing to pay damages over time. Losing his career did not transform him overnight. For months, he told relatives that I had used corporate lawyers to crush him. Then people stopped repeating his version. Evidence is difficult to compete with forever. My parents and I did not return to weekly dinners or pretend everything had healed. My mother began attending counseling and occasionally sent messages that contained no guilt, demands, or updates about Michael. At first, even ordinary kindness from her made me suspicious. That was one of the hidden costs of favoritism. When love has always arrived with conditions, sincerity feels like another trap. My father resisted longer. He wanted forgiveness to function like a receipt proving that his debt had been paid. During our first conversation after the public correction, he said, "We admitted we were wrong. What more do you want?" I told him I wanted nothing. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. I was no longer negotiating for a place in his approval. Whether we built a healthier relationship depended on what he did consistently, not what I begged him to understand. A year after the canceled engagement, my parents attended an Emberline community preparedness event. They sat in the back row. My father did not introduce himself as the father of the CEO. He listened while I spoke about recovery, responsibility, and the dangers of ignoring small failures until they become disasters. Afterward, he approached me alone. "I thought success had to look like Michael," he said. "I think I needed it to." That was the closest he had ever come to admitting the truth. Praising Michael had allowed my father to praise a version of himself. Ambitious, polished, admired, never publicly uncertain. My choices frightened him because they did not depend on his contacts or follow the path he understood. Instead of admitting fear, he called me a failure. I told him I appreciated the honesty, but honesty did not automatically restore trust. He nodded. For once, he did not argue. People sometimes imagine revenge as a perfect moment when the person who hurt you loses everything while you walk away untouched. My experience was less cinematic. Michael faced consequences, my parents were forced to confront their favoritism, and I gained the public recognition they once denied me. Yet none of it erased the memory of standing in my office with a wrapped engagement gift while my father told me my existence would embarrass the family. What changed was not the past. What changed was my willingness to let the past define my value. I used to believe that one extraordinary achievement would finally make my family see me. Then I built a company, protected lives, created jobs, and still had to be introduced to my brother as his fiancée's boss before he understood that I mattered. That taught me something success alone never could. People committed to diminishing you will reinterpret every accomplishment until you stop asking them to judge it. Blood creates a connection, but it does not guarantee safety, loyalty, or respect. Sometimes distance is not cruelty. Sometimes it is the boundary that prevents love from becoming permission to harm you. Forgiveness can be meaningful, but forgiveness without accountability is simply an invitation to repeat the injury. I did not win because Michael lost his career. I won when I stopped needing his failure to validate my success. I won when my employees knew I would defend them, when Jessica chose truth over appearances, and when I could sit across from my father without shrinking into the role he had written for me. My family called me a failure because they believed I would always return and ask them to reconsider. Instead, I built a life where their verdict had no authority. Maybe one day Michael will accept responsibility without blaming me. Maybe my parents and I will create something honest from what remains. I am open to change, but I no longer confuse hope with access. Anyone who wants a place in my life must arrive with respect, consistency, and actions that match their apologies. Because the deepest revenge is not watching the people who underestimated you suffer. It is becoming so grounded in your own worth that they can no longer control your future. So tell me honestly, if your family excluded you, lied about you, and only apologized after the truth became public, would you forgive them immediately? Or would you wait until their actions proved that the apology was real?
Thank you for watching until the end. Everything in this world, fiction and intended only for entertainment, education, and reflection. We hope it reminds you that the strongest version of you may not be the one who gets revenge, but the one who no longer needs the people who once made you feel powerless. That kind of strength is quiet, steady, and deeply freeing.